I've been charged with giving an introduction, which I'll keep as short as possible. But it's one of those requests I was extremely happy to respond to because it's a real genuine pleasure to welcome Chana Schütz back to Austin. She's now, I would say, a longtime friend of the Schusterman Center and of the university. Chana is a native Berliner who studied art history and history in Berlin, Jerusalem, and Bonn, and she is the deputy director, a researcher, and curates exhibitions at the Centrum Judaicum in the Foundation for the New Synagogue, which is right in the center of Berlin, including she's been developing this project, Robert Capa, Berlin, summer 1945, which I'm really anxious to see. It opens at the beginning of May of next year, on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany. And it is going to, well, she'll tell you more of the details, but when Capa was in Berlin in the summer of 1945, he took over 500 photographs, which are very little known and certainly not displayed very often. And they're going to be, as I understand it, the focus of this exhibition. So without further ado, Chana.
Thank you very much, David. Robert Capa, here you see him. That's the only picture of him in this whole cage of 500 photographs of Berlin. So you see him as he's remembered by a lot of people with a glass of whiskey in his hand and actually in his mouth. Robert Capa is one of the most well-known war photographers and photojournalists of the 20th century. His images from the battlefields of Europe in the 1930s and 1940s have shaped our visual memory. Capa covered the Spanish Civil War, the Allied conquest of North Africa and Italy, the invasion of Normandy, the liberation of Paris, the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, and the War of Independence. His photograph, published in Life magazine in 1937 of the falling soldier, became an anti-fascist symbol of the Spanish Civil War. He was only 23 then. Largely unknown remain the more than 500 photos Capa took in Berlin during the first weeks of August and early September 1945. A subjective snapshot of the city and its inhabitants in ruins. Life magazine published only a small selection of these photographs, which included shots of the Black Market in front of the Brandenburg Gate, as well as the first Rosh Hashanah service after the Shoah, a celebration held by surviving Berlin Jews in unison with American and Soviet soldiers. That was actually a very, very short period where both were still together as allied. Most of Capa's Berlin pictures were never published, we heard that. Had they been rejected by photo editors of the magazines, or did most of these images never reach the picture desks at all? They all belong to the Robert Capa archive at the International Center of Photography and exist in negatives and on contact sheets. What moves us today about these pictures? Do they reflect Capa's experiences in Berlin at the beginning of the 1930s, or do they refuse such an interpretation? The Hungarian Jewish photographer knew Berlin well. In the early 1930s, he was 18 years old. He began his career at Simon Gutmann's soon-to-become legendary photo agency Defot. The upcoming exhibition at the Centrum Judaicum will give insight into the work of the greatest photographers of the 20th century, for whom those weeks in Berlin during the summer of 1945 signified a turning point in his life and career. The exhibition is developed in cooperation with ICP and will open, as we heard, from David on May 6th, just before the anniversary, 75th anniversary of the liberation from National Socialism. It will be on display until the end of the year 2020, and I hope very much that you and your Normandy group will come and see it. Together with Robert Abzug, I encountered Capa's Berlin 1945 photograph for the first time at the Harry Ransom Center in Austin in 2017. Looking through the Magnum collection, we discovered a dozen of pictures of Berlin in ruins by Robert Capa. Most of these were published in picture books, devoted to his work during the 1980s and 1990s. Then Robert advised me to connect with ICP. He just worked on an exhibition about Roman Vishniac, to continue, who is also work is at ICP, to continue the research, which then became the beginning of the exhibition project. I will begin my talk with a few images before Capa came to Berlin in the beginning of August 1945. The first one, please. This, of course, you all know. The title, this is the famous photograph he have done from the reaching the Omaha Beach on the 6th of June 1944 at Normandy. So the title of his memoir, Slightly Out of Focus, published in 1947. He was 33 years old, and he wrote a memoir, alludes to his famous D-Day pictures, which were shot under heavy fire in June 6, 1944. Life magazine published the few negatives that were safe because most of the film ruined in the dark room in London. One of the images include this image of a lone soldier edging through the water towards Omaha Beach. And I think the lone soldier, that is always his topic. Next one, please. Another iconic picture by Capa is the picture of, I quote, the last man to die in World War II, Europe, taken in Leipzig, April 18th, 1945, just before liberation. I'm going to play a 2-minute video interview from 1947, which is the only recording of Capa's voice. His friend referred to it as he spoke in Capanese. You will hear that. He will reference to this photo of a young American soldier who was killed by a German sniper while he was taking the photo. Please play it.
The story about the last man killed in the war, and the picture you took of that.
Oh, yes. That was in just before Leipzig. It was obvious that the war was just about being over because we knew that the Russians were already in Berlin and that we had to stop shortly after taking Leipzig. And we got into Leipzig after some fight. We just had to cross one more bridge. The Germans put up some resistance, so we couldn't cross. And it was a big apartment building which overlooked the bridge. So I figured I'm going to get up on the last floor there and I will get a nice picture of Leipzig or something in the last minutes of fight. So I climbed up 4 floors and I got in a nice bourgeois apartment where on the balcony was a very nice young man, a young sergeant, who put up a heavy machine gun to cover the crossing. And he was first putting out this machine gun in the window, but was not comfy enough, so he just moved out on the open balcony and put up that heavy machine gun. I came out there too and kind of looked at him to take a picture of him, but God, the war was over. Who wanted to see one more picture of somebody shooting? We've been doing that same picture now for 4 years, and everybody wanted something different. And by the time this picture would have reached New York anyway, probably the headline would have been peace. So it made no sense whatsoever. But he looked so clean-cut, and he was one of the men who looked like if it would be the first day of the war. He still was earnest about it. So I said, all right, this will be my last picture of war. And I put my camera and took a portrait shot of him. And while I shot my portrait of him from 2 yards, he got killed by a sniper. It was a very clean, somehow very beautiful death, and I think that's what I remember most from this war.
And that was the last, you think, probably the last man killed during the official war.
That's right. I am sure that there were many last men who were killed, but he was the last man maybe in our sector, and it was just about the real end of the war.
It was certainly a picture of the uselessness of war.
Very much so, and for me it was certainly a picture to kind of remember, because I knew that the day after people will begin to forget. So it was a kind of clean definition. This was the last who will not forget the war.
So I think this is very, very impressive, because he speaks of a beautiful death, and he speaks of forgetting what they all went through, because all photographers, as all soldiers, and I want to refer to Robert's great book, had these terrible experiences in the war, even though they were not liberating the camps. But all of them were traumatized, and that he combines it with forgetting the war, that this one will not forget the war because he's dead. I mean, that is very, very, very strong and very disturbing comment. So, but we come to the next picture, and we see this. This is the famous victory issue of Time of Life magazine of May 14th, 1945. 2 days later, after this happened in Leipzig, Nuremberg fell to the US Army. And Capa shot this picture of American soldier, we have his name, Hubert Strickland, who mockingly gives a Nazi salute in front of a huge swastika at Hitler's party stadium. And it became the cover of this May 14th issue. Now we come to Berlin. We have no commentaries by Capa himself about his time in Berlin. Besides the stories he somehow submitted with the photos he sent to Life magazine, but they were not really used. He also doesn't mention Berlin in his autobiography. But in the last chapter he writes of the autobiography, he writes the following, and I will quote: "From the Rhine to the Oder, I took no pictures," which is a lie. He did take pictures, as we have seen it. "The Germans, now sullen, now suddenly friendly, didn't interest my camera either," which is also not true. We were going to see it. "I wanted to meet the first Russian and then pack up my war." He met the Russians, and this is, I want to show you, this is this famous photograph by another Jewish photographer. It's like the most famous photograph of the liberation of Berlin. It was staged because it was done already. It was after the May 2nd, Berlin was liberated, but they wanted to do this already on April 30th, but there was still some fighting around, so they had to do it again. So we see a Soviet army soldier raising a flag, this flag was actually the famous flag. I don't know the name of the place in the Pacific, which was where the American flag was raised. Iwo Jima, yeah. So this Mr. Chaldei, he knew this, and he asked his uncle in Moscow to make such a flag. So he came with this flag to Berlin, and he put it on the Reichstag, but when you look more careful, you can see it. You can see that there are more people there, more other soldiers, and you see this Russian soldiers with 2 watches on each arm, and that refers to the black market. And one of the stories Capa did was about the black market. And I would love to show you a film by the first segments of a film by Billy Wilder, a very famous film called A Foreign Affair, where exactly all this is taking place. So this is just shows Capa with Russian soldiers. This is the only private photographer we have. This is owned by his cousin, Suzy Maki in Rambouillet. And the next one, this is Capa making a photograph of making a photograph, so in Berlin. So. Is it working? No. What? Okay. A little bit about Billy Wilder, and he was 8 years older than Capa. He lived in Berlin, he worked in Berlin, and he left when in the age of 27. So Capa left Berlin the age of 19. He, when the age of 27, he came back, and as part of the re-education program of the Allied, he put together films about the liberation of the camps called Death Mills, but he also wanted to do a Hollywood film because the news which they knew or which they were sending from Europe, what happened in the camp, were so dreadful that they said it's not the right way to transmit this. Will not put into the future. So they thought that actually Hollywood, and to put these problems or these life in Berlin and the struggling, and also like the guilt and the shame, and also everything into a film. So the plot is very, very simple. It's a group of Congress people who are coming to Berlin to see and to check the morale of the American soldiers, because there were rumors that they were only seeing Fräuleins, and they will actually not really, it will not actually be pride of the American army. And so there's a group of these congressmen coming to Berlin, and that's the beginning. And they are confronting it with, of course, with a very good-looking officer who has an affair with one of the nightclub singers. Her name is Marlene Dietrich. And so she is actually the star of the film, but of course she is connected with the old Nazi people. So shall we move? Yes, now we start.
Congressman, we're now flying over the heart of Berlin. Berlin! Over 75,000 tons of explosives were dropped here. British Lancasters by night, American fortresses by day. I heard Russian artillery had a little part in it, too, if you don't mind.
Sure they did. And I wish they'd pay us for all those cannons.
Hey, quit juggling. Film like this is good stuff around election time. The incumbent overseas.
Petticoat, don't you want to see it? Look at it, like pack rats been gnawing at a hunk of old moldy rope for cheese. Miss Frost. Congresswoman Frost.
Present.
We're flying over Berlin.
15 minutes ahead of schedule.
Well, don't you want to see it?
One thing at a time. These are very grave problems indeed, but they don't happen to be the problems of this committee. Perhaps I should remind you why we were sent to Berlin, since our chairman, the Honorable Mr. Pennicott of New Hampshire, has been indisposed ever since we took off from Washington. We're here to investigate the morale of American occupation troops, nothing else. 12,000 of our boys are policing that pest hole down below, and according to our reports, they are being infected by a kind of moral malaria. It is our duty to their wives, their mothers, their sisters, to find the facts. And if these reports are true, to fumigate that place with all the insecticides at our disposal.
If you'll pardon me, we're approaching Tempelhof Airfield.
Doggone if they haven't got a reception out for it.
A band and everything.
I guess they'll be mighty glad to see home folks again. Hey, look what I picked up at the Brandenburg Gate.
How much?
A dozen candy bars. They still got some 9.5s.
Never mind, I got no one to give them to.
How about Trudy?
I lost her. Russian sergeant came along with a pound of rancid butter. Listen to those German dames, they're all
Speak
alike.
for yourself, kid. I wouldn't be afraid of a Russian general with a ton of caviar.
Nice toad.
The best.
No, one round watch, very big, nice face.
You're tough. All right, let's look in the other drawer.
Mickey Mouse! Mickey Mouse! How much?
$700.
You got 3 like this watch, maybe?
We'll see.
Herr Captain, would buy porcelain, little Cupid to take for wife.
Never mind the knickknacks. How much for the mattress?
The mattress, why you want the mattress?
Erica!
Okay, so you probably have seen that the part of it was footage, putting in the background, and part of it was, of course, staged as the last, when he walks up the stairs. These are all props in Hollywood. So all the scenes you have, or all the subjects and scenes you have seen in these 10 minutes are somehow part of Capa's pictures too. So he covered the black market, and even the story about the Mickey Mouse watch comes from this article, and yeah. And now we are in the exhibition already, and I would like to show you the way Capa went through the city. It's exactly the same way as Wilder went through the city. So that Berlin was always somehow divided in West and East, even before the wall. So he has, can you go back? So he started here, the guy started here, and he went down to the, to the so-called Ost-West-Achse, down to Charlottenburg, and here we have the old church of which we saw the church as a ruin, and he goes further, especially on town scene. For Wilder, it was very important to show town scene, the view to the famous Kaiser Wilhelm Gedächtniskirche, like the main church in West Berlin. It was like a landmark. So it's interesting that he just showed the same way. And we will now, I mean, he goes up only here to the west, and to this is like this axe, and he goes up to Alexanderplatz, Capa, and then he goes later, he goes up to one of the big bunkers, and we will see it in the when we go through the exhibition. Okay, now we start. So this is very typical for the cage for the archive. Is you have here the picture we have seen already, and then there is a random picture of children in a park. And the idea of the exhibition is not to focus on single images, but on series, because that is so fascinating about it. And so we are going actually back to the source, to the time he has done made the pictures, and not what photo editors have chosen later for publications. So we will do that now. We have arranged it according to the movement, and I will just read this to you. The exhibition constitutes of 120 photographs, and is similar to the film footage we have just seen. Capa's pictures guide us through the streets of Berlin. From west to east Berlin, from Kurfürstendamm to Unter den Linden Avenue, from the Berlin Zoo, passing the Black Market in front of the Brandenburg Gate to Potsdamer Platz, once the pulsing center of pre-war Berlin. In 1945, urban wilderness, and soon to be located between the eastern and the western blocks. 2 chapters of the Capa exhibition will be on display at the Centrum Judaicum in the front of the memorial, which has more than 50,000 names of Berlin Jews murdered in the Shoah, on the former women balcony of the synagogue. These pictures of Capa show the first Jewish New Year celebration in Berlin in a small synagogue in Berlin-Kreuzberg, as well as a mass demonstration of over 50,000 people against fascism in Berlin-Neukölln, among them former prisoners of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp who have fought in the Spanish Civil War. Both events took place at the same day, on September 9th, 1945. But most of the pictures he shot in August. You can see it because it's really in the middle of the summer. Good that these people didn't know that a very severe winter came in '46, and a lot of people died because there were no heating. But here you have like merry and leisure time in the ruins, and he photographed it very, very carefully, and so we have the scenes here in the nightclub. This was a famous Berlin nightclub until the Nazis took over. It was owned by a Jewish man who was forced out. It was only opened in 1929, and it was something like a smaller version of was called the Haus Vaterland. It was for the first time in Europe or at least in Germany, that you had a Vergnügungs what heißt Vergnügungstempel, like a pleasure place with several stages and with several bands and so on. That was the famous Femina nightclub, which was almost not destroyed in Nürnberger Straße. That's very close to town scene and also to the church. And here we see him making pictures out of the building on the street, and you see in that time there were only army vehicles on the street of Berlin. And this was used here. You can see the flag, the American flag and the Russian flag, and you have here some young women standing in front of it. And you go inside and you see here an American women officer smoking a cigarette and cheering with Russian soldiers. And in the back there, again, the Deutsche Fräuleins. And here you have a scene of the bar scene. And we don't know why he did it, but he did it. And he could not place any of these pictures in the media because they were not interested to see that. And now the next one, and this is it is on the way to where most of the American journalists and officers stayed. It was in Zehlendorf, and you had to go a big street down, and you passed this urban area in Charlottenburg, and you can see that still the war traces, but children are playing inside, and also you see these grass inside the pond. You see that it was not kept for the last years because it was the war, yeah. So, and then now the next one. And this is like one of the most famous corners of West Berlin. That is Tauentzienstraße and Kurfürstendamm, the famous Kanzlereck here. And people are queuing around and looking for news. And here we see already the first Berlin newspaper, the Berliner Zeitung, of May, which was the first issue was May, already in May, end of May 1945. The Russians liberated Berlin in May and established all over the city, like they did a lot for culture. They enforced like schools and also cultural activities until the Americans only came in July. So it was already a lot of theaters and like culture activities were happening. And here, of course, was the way of how to communicate with each other. So that was a way to publicize, I don't know, a stove or to change. It's a little bit like in the market. So the next one. So this is a scene you cannot hardly see here. This is the scene. This is very close to the American headquarters in Zehlendorf. There was a whole. It was some of you who are architects. This is one of the famous Bruno Taut buildings of Berlin of the 1920s. So here you see Berliners with the ration carts queuing up for potatoes, because the shops were occupied by the Americans, and because there was some kind of a recreation center and shops where only Americans could buy, so they had to do this here. And so we come to the Zoologischer Garten. This is the Berlin Zoo. The very specialty about the Berlin Zoo is that it is located in the middle of the city. So it was very severely damaged also during the bombing, and only 93 animals survived. And it's very close here to the U-Bahn, to the station, to the Zoologischer Garten station. And here you can see already, you can see this Ost-West-Achse, East-West, where the Nazis built Achse. towards the Brandenburg Gate. And here you see the women pushing a cart with rubble. And of course, this also reminds you of pictures we know of forced labors in Eastern Europe. And so this is one of my favorite pictures because it has some kind of surrealist atmosphere, and it is queuing for on the bus stop in front of completely destroyed houses. This was once one of the most populated areas. It was the so-called Knie. It was the connection between East and West Berlin. And here, can you just go back just to give a hint? The Ost-West axle was mainly built by Albert Speer, and unfortunately, only these lamps they survived because they are designed by Albert Speer. So this helped us to locate the place. So, and here we have the bunker in Humboldthain. There were two big bunkers, one in Zoo and one in Humboldthain, which is a little bit to the north. And he also gives an account how everything was situated. And here we have the big series of pictures about the black market. And here I wanted to show you this, that you can see that the Americans and Germans and Russians, and so this was really like the meeting place in Berlin. Now we come to Brandenburg Gate. He made great pictures going up the gate, and then he went to Potsdamer Platz, which is another joint between East and West. And here we have a picture from the Brandenburg Gate towards the west, and here this is Potsdamer Platz and Wertheim department store. This was one of the great Jewish places, great Jewish department stores in Berlin, where only the name survived. And here we have Unter den Linden Avenue. This is like Berlin's most prestigious street, and the Alexanderplatz. And here you have he pictured a tank in front of the houses. And you know that these marks are all later. They have nothing to do with him. And so in this picture, you see that it's Goldschmiedekunst. So this is the German script is still on, and like a palimpsest, there are put on each other. So they have done this picture of Stalin, and this is the famous Neue Wache. This was the place for all the victims of the wars, which of course was. The Nazis used it for their purposes, and somebody made a cross here, which was never there. So, and now we come to this to the demonstration against fascism. These are the second day of him in September 9th. So I choose these two pictures in order to see what kind of odd situation that was. 50,000 people came to protest against fascism, but not, of course, not all 50,000 were fighters. They considered themselves victims because they lost their husbands, they lost people, but they were not fighters that necessarily. So, no mention of the Jews. It was only about the fighters. And this is, can you do the next? And this is very obvious in this poster because it was, Berlin is honoring all dead and living heroes and fighters against fascism. The Jews were not considered fighters. They were victims, but they were not considered fighters. And so there was no mentioning of the Holocaust during that demonstration, except that they read a very long and very impressive poem by Johannes Erbecher about the children's shoes of Lublin. So that is the only mentioning of the Holocaust, and so this is the situation at the synagogue in Kreuzberg. It was the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and this is the only time Capa has you have the feeling that he is pointing, or he is engaging into this into the suffering. So it was a very strange situation because at the end of the war, only old people lived in mixed marriages, so-called, because they were not deported when you were married to a non-Jew and he did not divorce or she did not divorce. And the children, only old people, some people could hide around 1500, but it was a big like event for the American forces to install this in an existing synagogue. And we have this picture, not by Capa. He was not interested, obviously, in doing this. This is a picture by Fred Ramage, and it's only because it's now used by Getty Images. You can find it in the internet, and it's probably there are more pictures of other photographers of things like that which are not known. And this is also, I think, this is one of the reasons why we are doing this exhibition to bring out pictures which are not known yet. And so this is Fred Ramage. Fred Ramage was a British war photographer, and he mainly he served like for the English public. And different to life and the American public, in England there was a much more closer connection to the old Jewish community in Berlin, because it also served the Palestine, where German Jews immigrated, and a lot of Jews, and including these Kindertransporter children, came to England. So England was much more interested also in showing what happened to the Jews. And this event was published twice, one in Life magazine and one in Illustrated, and both are connected to Capa, but we think actually that one is not Capa, only Life magazine is Capa, and this is here shows Capa and this is Ramage, and you can really not differentiate. They are somehow the same pictures. And we went through all the pictures of ICP of that event, and we could not find a picture of this is a famous. Sorry, yeah, Mama, yeah, you can do it. Yeah, this is a famous Capa picture, which was used in a lot of publications. But this is not what was published in the in the newspaper Illustrated. In Life magazine, he could not it was not published at all. So we think that both photographers submitted pictures, and then the picture was decided. And it's actually, one cannot differentiate anymore which was by whom and which picture. So I think this was one of the reasons why they founded Magnum, because they were all without authors. So in none of these pictures is either Ramage or Capa, and so this must have been such an extraordinary thing to see, and among these old people, these couple are they're not twins, but there are brothers, and we know the name today. They survived. They had survived with their mother, but the mother couldn't stand it anymore to be all the time hiding, so she went out and she was killed. And she was found. They were found on the street, and they were Jewish boys, and they both went to America. So this is Ramage, not Capa, what I just said. This is, these are Jewish children in a foster home in Berlin. And among them is Joel and Rea Fabian, the children of Max Fabian, who was the only one who came back from Theresienstadt because he worked on, he was a lawyer, and he was the one who could do the administrational transference of the Reichsvereinigung under the Nazis. So they were taken to Theresienstadt, and he was brought back, and then when the war was over, he went back and got his wife and his kids back. And so they have these odd suitcases, which we know from other places. So now I'm coming to another event. We saw the officer in the car. So he passed this famous corner on Marburger Straße when we see him, when we see also this line of the Kaiser Wilhelm Gedächtnis, the Memorial Church, the center of West Berlin, and Stephen Hölscher, in his article about Vishniac, he pointed out that Vishniac, who came in 1947 to Berlin, he lived also in Berlin for 20 years, and he left after the pogroms. And he came back to work for the American Jewish Joint and to make pictures, but he also went to his neighborhood. So he made these pictures around his neighborhood in Charlottenburg. And it is exactly the same picture, like 2 years later than Capa. And a little bit has happened in the meantime. They put up the sign of the street and that there is a hairdresser. And besides this, it was all the time. This was all the time repeated. These or copied from each other. So I would like to show the next. This is Vishniac. Vishniac also very different to Capa. He showed like also really the suffering or the tortured people, and this is a wonderful view from his destroyed house in Fasanenstraße on the street, and this is a picture from the DP camp in Schlachtensee, which was established during 1946, and this is a Berlin Jewish girl who survived the Holocaust in Berlin, and she was sent on a retreat to Switzerland, and her name was Ruth Sternfeld, and we found her. And next. So I want to go back to Capa and Ramage, or Capa and another photographer. Here you see exactly the same, almost exactly the same scene, but this one has a different caption. This one says, materials looted from European countries provide clothing for German women who are well dressed compared to women from other countries at the end of the war. So this is a Ramage picture, and of course he could sell it very, very well to an English newspaper, because as we all know, English was in a catastrophic situation after the war. And here we see Capa. Capas, I mean, you see these people who are somehow arranging themselves. They are sitting here with glasses of water, and one person ordered a cup of coffee, and they have their food on the hips, on the Schoß of them, yeah, and on the legs, and they want to have fun, and so Capa did not make a picture like that, or did not give this comment. And also a picture like that would have never been in Capa's. This is the mocking in front of the Reichskanzlei, and he is. This is an American soldier playing the part of Adolf Hitler, makes the Nazi salute of the balcony of the destroyed Reichskanzlei in Berlin, as a British and a Russian soldier stand beside him, while American and Russian soldiers cheer on July 6, 1945. And now we come to the famous, mysterious picture of Ingrid Bergman in the bathtub. Capa met Ingrid Bergman in Paris for the first time beginning of June 1945. Bergman had just won an Academy Award for her performance in Gaslight and was on her way to Germany to entertain the American troops. 2 months later, both Capa and Bergman met again and started a love affair in Berlin, while Capa was on assignment by Life magazine to cover the black market. Most of his pictures of the ruined city we have seen, Capa made during these first weeks of August, including pictures of Bergman in a broken bathtub in the middle of a street of ruin of Berlin. These pictures by Capa were destroyed because he developed his film in such a hurry that he ruined the negative. Bergman wrote this in her autobiography. This picture of Bergman in the bathtub in Berlin was taken by Carl Goodwin, which unfortunately I could not find. A person like Carl Goodwin, I think he does not exist. It's the only existing picture of that scene. So what happened? Maybe there was another reason that Capa's pictures were not shown in public. And I'm referring to another beautiful woman in a bathtub. That's her. You all know this picture of Lee Miller in the bathtub of Adolf Hitler. In Munich, in his Munich apartment. Lee Miller was a beautiful woman, as we see. She was a model, but she also became a war photographer for the Americans, for the American forces, and she was like Mary Book White, she was there by liberating Gardelegen and like one of the most terrible events which happened there. Maybe people were burned alive, and so she made these pictures, and it's a statement, but it's also very disturbing, and but it became very famous. So leaving that, I'm coming to an end. In 1947 was a turning point in Capa's life. Right, Cynthia Young, curator of the Robert Capa archive at the International Center for Photography, New York, in the book Capa in Color. He founded Magnum, the photographers' cooperative agency he had dreamed of since 1938, and traveled to the Soviet Union. Capa and his partners in Magnum, notably Henri Cartier-Bresson and the Polish-Jewish David Seymour, known as Chim, now owned their own negatives, retaining copyright of their pictures. It was an act of radical opposition against time life and its corporal culture. In 1947, Capa also visited Russia together with John Steinbeck. Together, they published a Russian journal with photographs by Capa. And in May 1948, Capa covered Israel's independence and the War of Independence. In October 1948, he traveled to Poland and photographed the ruins of the Warsaw Ghetto. And all these projects were already self-arranged. He got a lot of money for it to do these projects. I mean, he got much more money than John Steinbeck to do this. So he was really very, very famous. Following Poland, Capa returned to his native Budapest for 6 weeks. Looking down on the, and I quote, "Looking down on the burned-out row of hotels and the ruined bridges," Capa wrote in the travel magazine Holiday, "Budapest appeared like a beautiful woman with her teeth knocked out." His article included a long conversation with a boyhood friend named Sandor Euphoria. I quote, "As only one of 20 of Hungary's Jews survived the war," wrote Capa, "I was surprised to see that his name was still above the shop and even more surprised to find him alive." Sandor described his wartime experiences in Russia and his difficult existence in communist Budapest. I quote, "I left his shop feeling sorry for both of us," wrote Capa. "He was my age, and he made me feel suddenly very old." Capa was 35 years old. 17 years earlier, in 1931, he had fled fascist Hungary for Berlin. The son of middle-class dressmakers, he was born André Friedman. A year later, he published photographs of a fiery Leon Trotsky orating in Copenhagen. In 1933, he fled Berlin after the Nazis' rise to power, end of January 1933, and moved to Paris and met a young Polish-German emigre named Gerda Pororille. She worked under the name of Gerda Taro, who became the great love of his life. Together they took pictures and invented a mysterious, dashing photographer named Robert Capa, who charged high prices for his brilliant work. Together they covered the Civil War in Spain, where Gerda was killed in 1937. 10 years later, Capa, promoting his book Slightly Out of Focus on the radio show in New York, he was asked about the name of Robert Capa. And this is my last quote here, audio. So while this is loading, I can say something about this, it's not, you cannot really see it very well. This is the only trace we have of his Berlin time. He was a young student, and then he worked for Default in summer 1931 and summer 1932, not 32, and winter 31, 32. So. No?
Let's go back to the thing that John Hersey said about you, that you're the man who invented yourself. Can you tell us that story?
Sure enough, I had a name which was a little bit different from Bob Capa. That was a long time ago in Paris, around 1934, 1935. And that real name of mine was not too good. You know, it was a young man, kind of just as foolish as I am now, but younger. And on my own name, I couldn't get assignment anymore. And I kind of decided at that moment it's time for me to be a working man, a great photographer, and etc. And I needed a new name very badly.
What was your old name?
Oh, it's very embarrassing for me to say something there. It began with Andre, and it was Friedman. The two of them hang together, and let's discard it for a minute.
All right.
So I was figuring on a new one, and I figured that something like Robert would sound very American, because that was how somebody had to sound. And figured Capa, again, sounding as American or something, and figured it's easy to pronounce. So Bob Capa sounded like a good name to me. And then I invented that Bob Capa was a famous American photographer who came over to Europe and did not want to bother with French editors because they didn't pay enough. And that was a period when a lot of news happened in France. From Popular came strikes, etc. So I just sneaked in with my little Leica, took some pictures and put Bob Capa in it, which we sold for double prices.
So you went around selling the work of a non-existent cameraman.
Oh, I was known as his darkroom man.
Oh, I see. You were his darkroom man.
Yeah.
The mysterious Bob Capa.
Yeah, then one day it got discovered, and since then I stayed on to be Bob Capa, and it's quite comfortable.
He preferred to keep things ambiguous. His experiences during the war and in the aftermath, and also his Jewish identity. I quote, "I'm a photographer of life," he went on to declare, and after the war, I quote, "my only wish was to finally be an unemployed war correspondent." It was one of his patented lines. But war caught up with him again and again in Israel's War of Independence and in Vietnam, where he stepped on a mine on May 25th, 1954. French and Vietnamese soldiers on the road from Nam Dinh to Tay Binh, among one passing the dead body of a child, are his last pictures. Capa became the first American journalist to die in Indochina. He was 40 years old. Capa was buried in the Quaker Cemetery in northern Westchester County, New York. His gravestone gives the date of his birth in Budapest and on his death in Vietnam. And one more word in Hebrew, shalom. Thank you.
I think we have some time for questions. So would anyone like to start?
Is the exhibit going to the U.S. at all?
We hope very much. And if you have anything to help us, it would be wonderful, wonderful. Now, I think ICP wants first to see the wants to see the exhibition. Can we turn this off now?
Do we need the mics on still? It's still running. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so much for that now.
It seems like his pictures were very sharper than the others. They were clearer.
Yeah, this is this. Yeah, so so this is why I don't think that this whole thing with Bergman and the bathtub was really true. I think he did not develop them by himself in that time, because there was big. I mean, Kodak was very big in providing films to Germany, and there was a lot of filming, and the quality was very good. Yeah.
How did you get interested in painting?
Yeah, I got interested because I was here for some time, and I heard that the Harry Ransom Center has the Magnum archive, the print archive of Magnum. And so I looked it up. I looked up under Germany, 1945, because I'm very much interested in this before and after 1945. And so I came across these pictures, and they are themselves already interesting, what is there and what is not there. In the Magnum archive, because Magnum, I mean, he shot these before Magnum was founded, but Capa gave or his brother, who was actually then promoting after his death, his work, he chose several pictures, and was never really interested in giving the whole story. But I think it's interesting for us was interesting how he went through the city, and what did he choose as targets, which was interesting for him. And I think Billy Wilder and him, it was maybe accidentally, but they chose exactly the same subjects in the film, and Capa did. So maybe there is something to it, that they knew Berlin before it was destroyed. And so they came back in something which they were familiar, like with this memorial church, and also you can see it in Vishniac's. These are memento mori pictures as well, to not to lose them in that is not forgetting. And I mean, I think forgetting is a very on the one hand, they wanted to forget what they have seen. On the other hand, they didn't want to forget because it was. I mean, it's a typical Holocaust survivor syndrome that you want to keep it, but you can hardly exist with this knowledge. Yeah.
I just want to say on that, and it also comes to mind, there's another German Jewish photographer, Henry Reese.
Yeah, Henry Reese, yeah.
Who also came back in this period of time. And he talks about how it was a shock to him to see Berlin, because the last time he had seen it was just before he fled, and it was intact. And then, then it's all in ruins, and that made a huge impression on him.
Yes, absolutely. But he worked. He started to work for New York Times a little bit later, in '47. But he was in Berlin exactly the same time, and he says, I am somehow. Shall I feel satisfaction, or shall I feel sadness? But and this is we have some letters also from American soldiers who came originally, were Berlin Jews who came back. They were always torn. Like, I mean, to see that. But one says, my heart bleeds when I see it, and it's because it was their home also, and yeah.
I have one thing that fascinates me is that, if I'm understanding this correctly, all of these photographs that he took, hardly any of them were ever published. Is that true?
That's absolutely true.
Have you, in the course of doing this, developed any thoughts about why that was the case? Why no publishers were interested in them?
So I think America was not interested in, Alive magazine was not interested in these stories. I mean, the most it was the black market, and the Rosh Hashanah story. It's only 6 pictures, a very, very, very short thing, because other things were more important for the American public, especially the liberation of the camps in Eastern Europe. And then you had the what's happening in Japan, and then what's going on in Korea. And so Berlin was not hot anymore as a subject, and also I think the pure thing that the Americans did not liberate Berlin also made a difference. And with the English, it was something else, because the English had these very, I mean, also this distance, this closer distance. It's still Europe. I mean, even though they don't want to be part of Europe anymore, but it is Europe, and and America. I mean, it is very far away, and it is very far away, and I think only the immigrants were interested. And so, and even though, and if you look at the Aufbau, what was going on in Germany was not interesting. I mean, because they said, okay, the last Jews of Berlin will leave, and they will close the door behind them. And it's actually, I mean, Fabian, you know, the father of the 2 children I showed, he was the chairman of the Jewish community, but he went to the United States in 1949. So there was a time that, I mean, the Jewish question, like David Ben-Gurion, I mean, the Jewish question in Europe is there is no Jewish question anymore, and that is that is the fact, and yeah, and I think it's interesting how these pictures were used or not used. I mean. There was a famous, or like a forging of pictures about one Ramage picture. He showed people fleeing, and the German right wing made out of it Germans who had to flee the German lands, Schlesien and so on. But this picture were not Germans, but they were Polish fleeing from Warsaw, and so one has to be very careful with these pictures, because they were used for different purposes, and this is why I think an archive like ICP or Magnum is a great house for history, and even though these are not important anymore for us, because who is dealing with black and white prints except for auction houses where they can sell them for a lot of money? But they really show what was known in that time, and this is why the Capa works, which are here in the Magnum archives, are important to show how he was perceived, what was perceived of these pictures and how they were used.
So I'm particularly intrigued by something that you mentioned a couple of times, which is that so many of his photographs were lost during because of developmental issues, like developing the pictures. So, like, what do we lose there in terms of our knowledge of this time period, and of this photographic record, when, as you mentioned, so many of the photographs that he took were lost during development?
No, there's these famous D-Day pictures which were lost. Yeah. But of course there were other photographers, but he managed. He was a very good promoter, as we have heard. He was a very good promoter. There were other pictures of Omaha Beach. This was this particular thing. I think he also destroyed pictures, and I think this happened with the Bergman pictures, that he didn't want them to circulate, and I don't know why, but maybe this is just because maybe he thought maybe this is not right to show an American movie star in a broken bathtub in the ruins of Berlin. We don't know. So we don't know how many pictures he sent to picture desks, which were also thrown away. And this is, I think they were very much bothered by it because they didn't consider themselves, also Henri Cartier-Bresson and Jim Seymour, that they were really, they wanted to be taken seriously and not only illustrating events, but they claimed, and I think they were right, because some events we can only now judge because they were taken on photographs, so.
Any other questions? Okay. Yes, sorry.
There was one picture, I think a third before the end. There was women who were well dressed, and there was a man with a cap. And I don't know if he was a German or a Russian. No.
You just saw it there, no?
It was in a service. No, it was earlier.
Yeah, no, this was this one? No.
Oh, yeah, I know.
In the synagogue?
Yeah, I think so. No.
Oh, this one.
Just there. Yeah.
With, like, he looked like it was a mixed marriage, but no, it wasn't.
I just wanted to mention that we think this one is Capa over there, so this photo is not by him. But you can see there were other photographers during this service.
It was not in a synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering if it was a mixed marriage. Oh, wait.
No. No, that was no.
Is it too early?
I don't know.
I think we're too early now.
Yeah.
I couldn't ask you at the time.
No, the thing with the mixed marriages is, of course, they were. I rather suspect they were not at the synagogue, because most of them left already. So, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, let's thank Hannah again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.